The strength is 24, 25%, 25. So we have participants. Anyone can respond. Yogesh ji, baby Ritu madam.
Yes, sir, we are here.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. I think you have heard about NEP 2020 already.
Yes,
You
sir.
know what is yes. So actually, in its pre-test, before starting this workshop, this training program, as mandatory part, we have taken a test just to know that whether you are aware as far as NEP is concerned or not. And after the program, we will be. Ma'am has joined. Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon and walaikum salam. Yeah.
Ma'am, should we start, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm free to
Okay.
start. I think it's exactly 4 o'clock. We can
Yes,
start
ma'am.
on time. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, again in this program, the participants are assistant professors, associate professors, lecturers working in different colleges and universities of our country. And this is 20th program being organized by MMTTC Center in Aligarh. And you have been the part of all, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. So, and one more line about participants, ma'am. They are very sincere, and they know the arts. They know the etiquettes of online teaching learning. They most of the times they are on mute mode, as and when you will ask them, then only they will open their mic. Now, participants, as I was talking to you before ma'am has joined us, that somebody who is the best resource person to talk on NEP, we have invited ma'am. Now, I would participants, I would like to show one document to you before starting anything. So I am showing you. Please, one or two participants, I would expect that they will answer what is this. Participants, are you seeing it?
Yes, sir.
Yes. What is this?
Sir, this is the final final regulations of NEP 2020.
Soumya, Ghoshji, and another two participants. Yes, anyone?
Yes, sir. It is looking like a complete draft of NEP 2020.
Complete draft. And one more from girl side, female participants. Yes, ma'am. Somrita Dev, ma'am.
It is looking like the final draft of NEP.
Okay. Now, you would like to know that who was behind this policy?
Sir,
this is actually NEP 2020 policy. So now you would like to know who was behind that policy. So the person who was behind this policy is before us, ma'am Shakila ma'am. Shakila ma'am is the former OSD of NEP 2020. Actually, ma'am started working on this NEP in 2014. And till now, she is helping in orientation and sensitization now in implementation. So we are very much thankful to you, ma'am. You do not need an introduction. Everybody knows you, ma'am. Everybody knows you. And this NEP, which is a game changer policy, ma'am, as you have written in your policy, that's a very light but very tight policy. So now, participants, for you, although ma'am doesn't need any introduction, but before starting, I would like to have a few lines about ma'am. That ma'am, as I have already announced, that is the former OSD, National Education Policy 2020. At that time, ma'am was working in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, Government of India. Ma'am has been the Secretary of Committee to draft National Education Policy. Ma'am has also worked as Honorary Advisor, Special Education Policies, Center for Public Policy Research, Kerala. Ma'am has also worked as Nodal Officer of Government of India, a scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching, where I think you are already aware about participants about the programs LEAP and ARPIT. Ma'am was behind those programs. Ma'am has also worked as Joint Advisor of Education in Planning Commission. Ma'am has published a good number of papers in various national and international journals. And ma'am has been involved in the preparation of 11th and 12th plan. Ma'am has more than 40 years of experience in teaching and learning and in administration. And academics, ma'am has completed MA Political Science. She was a gold medalist of MA Political Science. And she has also completed her PhD in education. And she has been associated with two universities, two central universities. One is University of Mumbai and another, Indira Gandhi National Open University, IGNOU. As I have already announced that in 2014, she has started working on NEP, and now this is 2024. Since last 12 years, she is working on NEP, and the most apt and appropriate resource person on NEP is Dr. Shakila Shamsu, ma'am. Ma'am, we are very much grateful and we are very much indebted that you all the time, as and when the sessions on NEP are concerned, you are there for us, ma'am. Thank you once again, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, today we'll talk on a very important topic, that is governance and management of higher education as envisaged in NEP 2020. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
So thank you, Mohammed Shakir, and good evening to all the participants. And I think he showed you the a printout of the National Education Policy. So one of you mentioned it is the regulations. It is not the regulations. The other two mentioned it's the draft. It's not the draft. It is the final policy. And that is the policy which we are trying to understand. So I think if all of you have, I assume you may have read through it, but even if you have not, as an educator, and even if you are just in your beginning of the teaching career, you should be reading through the National Education Policy. Because if educators don't read an education policy, then there is no one else who would really be bothered about the policy. It is not a policy that retail shopkeepers will read, or somebody who is managing an industry or a corporate sector would read. It is we teachers and educators who need to read the policy. So let me urge each one of you to read through the policy, so that anytime someone is waving and showing you a document which is showing the title of NEP 2020, you have no doubts in your mind that this is the final version of the policy, and it is not the regulations, nor is it the draft policy. The draft was only the committee's report, and that is a very voluminous document of 484 pages. So the topic today that we are going to discuss is on governance and management in higher education, a very critical and crucial component of understanding the effectiveness of higher education. It will also involve, to some extent, touching on a topic of leadership. But as Dr. Shakir has mentioned, since I've been a part of the policy in its entirety, I would really like for about, let's say, 8 minutes or so to hear from a couple of you who can unmute yourselves and maybe share some of your thoughts on any aspect of the NEP. It need not be on the topic that we are going to discuss today. It can be on the 4-year multidisciplinary program. It can be on research and innovation, or it can be on the use of technology. On any aspect, I would really like to hear a few of you before I start talking, which I propose to do exactly at 4:15. So let me have the pleasure of listening to a few of you. Please unmute, introduce yourself in terms of the discipline you teach and the institution you're associated with, and share your views with me. That would give me a sense of the group that is here today. Come, I don't expect faculty to remain silent spectators. You all are teachers who teach in the class, and I don't want you to be a passive lot of people. If you can't unmute yourself, please ask the team over there to unmute. Otherwise, type it in the chat box, please.
Participants, please go ahead. Participants? Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Ma'am, good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Devesh Pratap Singh. I am speaking from Greater Noida. Here, I am working in GIMS, that is Jagannath Institute of Management Study, and my subject is mass communication. From this semester, ma'am, I would like to tell you, from this semester, we are following NEP. We are affiliated with Guru Gobind Singh Inprasth University. So, from this semester, we will utilize the policy.
4-year, you are going to implement the 4-year program from the
Yes,
current academic year.
program for 4 years, including research.
Okay, okay, good to hear that. And any thoughts on that? Any challenges that you feel, or you are absolutely fresh about it? You're still not having any grounds view about how to
This will
implement
be
it.
the first semester, yeah.
Okay. So good enough. Yeah. Anyone else?
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Mohammad Kamil and I'm from the same department. I'm working along with Devesh sir.
Mhm.
And as sir informed that we'll be implementing the NEP from this semester only. But one challenge that I am foreseeing is that students would be, having the option of quitting after doing the 1 year. After passing 1 year, they can opt for the certificate course. So in a way, our jobs would be at stake because we are into private setup. And what I'm seeing in what kind of decline we are seeing in mass communication is that students there is a less intake of students.
Mhm.
So there is a skepticism around this thing, that what if like we have intake of 60 students and 30 will go after 1 year, then
Mhm.
this is this kind of challenge we are seeing, ma'am, for NEP.
Okay. So let me try and clarify to you that the purpose of trying to give an exit option is not to really encourage a mass exodus of students at the end of any year. It is only an option which currently, because we say a student must complete the graduation in exactly 3 years flat in one straight go, without giving them that option that they can leave and come back. But there are cases where students are forced to leave, maybe because of financial problems, domestic reasons, their own health, or reasons that where they feel that they should go out into the world of work, get some experience, and then come back. Many compulsions. So, the purpose of giving that option is not to say that if 30 students have been admitted for a particular program, that all the 30 of them would take that option. It's only that if at all there are one or two, and I think that needs to be very well clarified when you conduct induction meetings. The problem, what is happening is that students and the parents are not being informed that the reason why we have given this option is not to ensure that all of them leave, because that is not going to serve any purpose. Getting a UG certificate with at the end of the first year does not really give them any advantage if they have everything else in place. That is, they don't have a financial problem, there is no health issue, and they may as well complete the course. So the need to sensitize the parents as well as inform the students that this is the way in which you should continue the program, but in case you have a problem, then maybe a very small minuscule percentage, we don't anticipate more than one or two students in that category who may want to take a break. Why that one or two students should be given that facility to exit and rejoin is because in the existing system that we had prior to NEP, if a student takes a break, that student is treated as a dropout or a failure. And should the student want to come back and join, whatever that the student had already studied in the first year or the second year would still have to be repeated once again. And therefore, would have been a complete loss in already doing the courses which were already covered by that person. So you're giving a 7-year window, and that when you provide that facility, it is not to be seen as a rule, rather it is to be seen as in exceptional circumstances that we should be able to facilitate that. That is the purpose. And about your concern that in private institutions, the teachers may be retrenched and so on, let me tell you that where institutions have not done proper curriculum planning, say, for example, yours is a course in mass communication, and the core subject might remain as mass communication, but we are expecting that there should be a lot of interdisciplinary courses, and there would be students taking up interdisciplinary course. Same way, mass communication should also be an interdisciplinary course in other core courses, which can be commerce, or it can be arts or science or even engineering for that matter. So that kind of rationalization has to be done. And the core, that is why I said that maybe it is too early for you all to really see that. But the idea is that the core course and the interdisciplinary course, these both cases have to utilize the facilities of the faculty And the policy is not in favor of retrenching that. And let me also tell you that since we are talking about mass communication as your discipline, and we are looking at a lot of media studies that needs to come in. Media studies is one of the, I would say, emerging areas of study. So I don't expect that, and if at all students are not coming in, it's because we have not been able to market that course in the true value that it has in today's requirement. So I would really say that you all also have to do a lot of, let us say, advocacy, spreading the word around in terms of its reach. And the way today we are talking about mass communication, not just in terms of print media, but lots of digital media. And people today are reading and watching news that are not coming from the normal channels. And so the scope of it, in terms of the reach, in terms of the market that it has, and in terms of even the range of products that are there today in mass communication, has to be made. But if you go by the traditional understanding of mass communication, there would be very few takers, including mass communication in its implications for education, in terms of content coverage, in terms of making out audiovisual materials that go out for educational purposes. All these have to be seen as new and emerging courses. So if you have an old syllabi and you're then trying to market it, it is likely that your intake would not go up. And I think that is one area, since there are two of you from the same institute and from the same department, I think you need to work on this a little bit so that you should not face this problem of attrition going forward. Yeah. Any other participant before I can take 3 people only, and I then want to go into the topic?
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, please.
Maybe Ritu Fukan from Digwa College in Assam.
Right.
Ma'am, regarding the selection of the modern Indian language in the curriculum, like emphasis is given on the promotion of multiculturalism and all that, multilingualism. But then what I'm trying to say here is that we have like students, calling me up and asking, because I have been involved in the admission process of the college, and we are in the second year of FY UGP, and students are calling up to ask whether they can have any other option besides the 4 modern Indian languages that we are offering, because it seems that most of the students are coming from maybe from English medium background, and even if they are from vernacular mediums also, like they are finding it very difficult to understand what a modern Indian language they should take. Because like I had a call yesterday, the student was really in a dilemma because he did not know what to do. He did not know Hindi. He did not know, he doesn't know, Hindi, or, our language is Assamese. He does not know Bengali. He does not know, Nepali, because these are the 4 Indian languages that we are offering. He doesn't have English to choose. Like we had alternative English earlier in our previous syllabus. We had alternative English. But now that choice is not there for him. So that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we are facing right now. I have one of my colleague here from the Department of Hindi, Dr. Anuradha Kumari Sahu. In fact, they were the ones who were facing the problems the most last semester, last year, when the first batch came, because they had more than 300 students taking up Hindi, but more than 70% students did not even have Hindi as as a subject till class 12. And when the results are out this time, today we have got the results, and we find that most of the students are having a back in this particular subject, that is AEC.
Yeah,
AEC,
I understand. Okay.
So that is one of the problems that we are facing, and the second one is that the students are in a fix. They are unable to kind of understand the subject combination, even though we are giving them the impression that anyone can choose any subject, any kind of select any subject. But then there are restrictions. Like science students can take up any subject they want, any discipline they can select. But as far as students coming from the arts background, they are having a problem. They cannot really take up subjects that are from the science stream or from the commerce stream. But the impression is that they can select any subject because it is interdisciplinary. Everything is open now for them.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that, ma'am? Like, we are really having problems with all these things. There are other issues also, but I'm just,
Okay.
talking
I
about
got your point. Got your point. Two things. One is on the aspect of selection of courses. When we say it should be allowed, if yours is an art, science, commerce, management, whatever faculties that you all have, the policy does try to say and should be made available, if you have these departments, to allow students to choose whether it's an art student wanting to take up any science subject also in which they have an aptitude and they feel that they have already have the grounding for it. There is no restriction for an art students. It is there in our minds because we have a baggage which we are coming with, and that baggage tells us that somebody who studied arts does not know the ABC of mathematics or the ABC of physics or the ABC of, let us say, botany and zoology or chemistry and so on, which is a fallacious argument that we are actually putting forward, because all of us studied that in our schooling and the fundamentals should be known to us. It's not because we've been so spoon fed and so structured and that we have sort of lost the ability to make independent decisions and make rational thinking as the backbone of making all these choices. So if they are having the confidence, but of course, if they do not have it, yes, they should not be asked to take it. We are not putting anything that is mandatory. We are not saying that mandatorily an art student, when choosing an interdisciplinary course, must be forced to take up a course in science or so on. We are only saying that you have an aptitude and then you have this choice and the college is offering it, or the college is trying to provide it in a multidisciplinary collaboration with another institution, then you are free to take that. Vice versa, it is true for science students wanting to learn maybe accountancy or wanting to learn maybe history, and that facility should be there. So subject to the availability of the course in your own institution or in a collaborative arrangement, and the inclination and the liking and the aptitude of the student to do that, that offering should be made available. And there is nothing that tells us that a student who is, let us say, even an art student wanting to learn something about maybe electronic circuits, and the student was very good at it in the school, therefore if it is there as an engineering subject, there is nothing that prevents it, because we have allowed under the NEP to choose across a range of subjects, and subject to, of course, this condition that the basic understanding of that subject is there, so that he or she is at the same learning level with other students who have taken that subject. Now, having said that, the fact that we have been used to a structured system where mandatorily we took up only subjects in arts or only subjects in science, and therefore to come out of that thinking and that we should learn across a range of subjects does take time, and we as faculty firstly must be convinced that this is the way going forward, and therefore when doing that kind of orientation and induction programs for the students, must have to tell them about the need, why it is very important today for students to have a range of disciplines in the requirements of multidisciplinary education, which is the way going forward. The second is about languages. Now, whether you came in from an English medium school or not, all of us studied at least 3 basic languages in our schooling system. And we have this hangover, which we have unfortunately not been able to get over, that we can only speak and we can only learn only in English language. A country which is home to 200 languages and 1,680 dialects and 22 languages listed in the constitution itself and the age schedule. It is highly undesirable that we do not encourage multi-language learning. So we are doing that in the schooling, and for students who are coming English with a second English is not the option. They need to understand that Hindi happens to be the national language, Assamese happens to be the regional language, and learning these languages in a certain way enriches their own understanding of culture and so many other aspects. So I think the way we looked at language learning in our schooling, and where we became so much prone to understanding that it's only learning one language. The more languages you speak, even as a child, and in fact, more so as a child, aids to the cognitive development of an individual.
Bye-bye.
And so, the reasons why we should encourage under ability enhancement to take up courses in multiple languages, and these are not going into deep literature. Ability enhancement courses are functional language skills that we are giving. It is only functional knowledge. And I don't think it is fair to say that anyone who had studied in any school in this country has learned only English, and they would have had a smattering of Hindi, they would have had a smattering, and language learning is not by hearting something. No subject should be learned like that. It should be the way you use that, and the way that needs to be sort of told in the classroom situation. So I think maybe you have a problem for some time. I still remember from my own planning commission days that the entire northeastern 8 sister states used to have a lot of departments for various languages. And I think that remained a strength, and we should encourage students to take up communicative skills in multiple languages. Let them be given some additional tutorials and so on. But I think that should be the trend, rather than saying that no, because I am only good at speaking English. We all are capable of that. But the other languages, we may speak those languages, but we don't feel confident about learning it as a subject or even teaching it as a subject. So I think it's a question of time, and it's also a question of making them understand that we are not like some European and Western countries and even some Asian countries, which is only home to about 1 or 2 languages. Whereas as a country, if we want to understand the strength of our culture, we should be learning different languages. And since we are not going into deep literature, as I said, and it's only functional language, I think that should be encouraged. And more students, if at all students have not fared well for a given examination, I think it's a question of the way we approach the pedagogy, which may not have been the way it should have been. And I think we should just give ourselves time to use more innovative pedagogy so that more and more students can perform better into that. But let us not try and restrict it to only English language. And we should be able to make students appreciate, firstly, be convinced ourselves as faculty, and make students and parents appreciate the need for knowing multiple languages, which will help them as they go forward in their life, not only as a productive individual, but as a social individual also going forward. So I'm not too sure, because I don't have much time to really talk about a topic which is very close to my heart, because we in the policy committee had a lot of discussions on the importance of multilingualism, and we covered at length a lot of rationale which is there in our draft report. But I think I'll have to stop at this point in clarifying. And if at all we have time at the end of the day today, after my session on governance and management, we'll still try to take it up. So thank you all for coming forward in sharing your initial observations. As I said, I left it open to all of you to talk on any aspect of the policy, since for me, the policy on any aspect is something that I feel happy to share my thoughts on. Now, coming to governance and management, I think all of us here would accept and recognize that India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world. We have something like about 1,200 universities, some 50,000 affiliated colleges, and some 13,000 standalone institutions. We have something like about 44 million students, and we have nearly about 16 lakh faculty. So this is the size of our higher education system. As a system, education is a subject in the concurrent list of the Constitution of this country. And since we are a federal setup, though the policies are brought out by the government of India, it requires a lot of cooperation and coordination with the state governments to ensure its effective implementation. That is both a challenge as well as an opportunity for having multiple models, because there is no one size that fits all, which all of us recognize in a country that is so differentiated and varied as India is. Now, that is exactly the reason why the challenge comes in terms of governance and management of the higher education systems. So, if you look at some of the challenges at the beginning, it is very important to perceive those challenges to understand the need for effective governance. So, one, of course, as I said, is the very massive size and the scale at which we operate. The second, of course, is the fact that it is something that is to be very well synced and coordinated between the center and the state as a subject in the concurrent list. The third comes in from the fact in terms of the diversity of the student population, and that there are a lot of variations in the educational participation of students coming from the so-called disadvantaged groups, which we wrote in the policy as the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So if you say the gross enrollment ratio in higher education today is about 28.1, which means that in the age group of students between 18 to 23, 28% of that students cohort is there in higher education, which is not a very large number. And we want to reach 50% by 2035. That's the target that we have set in the NEP. And in this, when you look at 28.1, you will realize that that covers the general population. That does not, it is not representative of students from SC, STs, OBCs, minorities, girls, children with disabilities, urban poor, and so on. So that category, the variations in educational participation, in a certain way pulls down the overall numbers that we have in higher education. So we need to rectify those disparities. We need to bridge those gaps in the educational participation of these cross sections of the society, so that going forward it becomes a sustainable number, and that all of them, because that is what we are looking at. We are looking at access, equity, quality, in the sense that as far as SDG 4 goes, to provide inclusive and equitable quality education with lifelong learning opportunities for all. When you say all, it doesn't mean whether I come from a poor family, whether I am belonging to this caste or community or speaking this language. All of us should have an equal opportunity to be able to participate in higher education, to join it, and to be facilitated to complete that course and come out successfully. That is, of course, a major challenge that we face, because you will see a number of the sections who have joined higher education and who struggle to complete their programs for a variety of reasons, ranging from financial problems, ranging from the fact that they do not have the right kind of facilities and amenities to be able to, because they are lacking all those, including language, which could be a barrier that comes in the way, because it was largely offered only in English medium and so on. So that's another challenge that we are looking at. The third challenge that is almost third or fourth challenge that we are looking at is the fact that there has been a disconnect between certain fundamentals of higher education. So higher education, you look at teaching and research, you look at research and entrepreneurship, and you look at the whole idea of skilling as such. So these core components of higher education, teaching, research, skills, innovation, and entrepreneurship, when you look at these all have been seen as if they were disparate or separated from one another. It was never seen in a very integrated manner, which has resulted in many of the shortfalls that we are looking at. So the gap between education and skills, for example, has resulted in creating two hierarchies, one which looks at white collar jobs and another which looks at blue collar jobs, and also not understanding that holistic development means that you need to have knowledge along with practicals. You need to have understanding of core theoretical aspects along with core competencies and skills, which is therefore education and skills going together. And now, therefore, when we talk about the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, it includes the skill qualification frameworks and the general education qualification framework and seamlessly brings them together in an integrated manner. So an ITI student or a polytechnic student comes into mainstream education. And when we look at the 4-year undergraduate program, we are looking at skill enhancement courses. We are talking about that being an integral part of the 4-year undergraduate curricula, giving up this notion in our mind that to learn skills was seen as secondary to general education, and that today in a labor market or in a corporate world, there is no distinction for the employer for both the theoretical and the practical. Rather, the person who has more practical skills has a premium over someone who has merely a theoretical understanding. So the need to intertwine education with skills was a challenge, and which we are now trying to address in a number of ways. The other is the gap between teaching and research, and which has resulted in Indian universities not featuring in the global rankings. So if Indian universities are 1,200 in number, and we take pride in saying that 5 of them feature or 7 of them feature, it is absolutely an untenable statement. If we have 1,200 universities, at least 200 or 300 universities should have been featuring in the global rankings. So we have failed to make a mark there because we have not understood that undergraduate education combines teaching and research. So here again, you see the 4-year curriculum trying to address that in terms of trying to say that among the common courses, we will teach our students the research skills, the digital skills, the collaborative skills, and so on. And we are weaving in this idea that we should have an undergraduate program where you can have a bachelor's with research as at the undergraduate level itself. Because teaching and research are not mutually exclusive, but are actually integrated together. And the downplaying of research in our undergraduate education has resulted in very poor quality research going forward, and has also resulted in the understanding that an undergraduate student who has come out has only memorized something and has only been capable of rote learning and therefore has had no real assimilation. Whereas if there was a real competency-based learning and an outcome-based learning, the spirit of inquiry and the spirit of curiosity would have been ignited, and research would have also been an equally integral part of undergraduate education. So this dichotomy also between teaching and research was a challenge that we have faced. And when we talk about research, the need to encourage research through a lot of industry, academia, collaboration, and so on, which was gravely missing but has started picking up in the 1990s. And the policy now talks about a research foundation and so on to ignite the idea of research and to expand it and scale it up with a kind of a ecosystem which looks at interconnectedness between academic institutions, research laboratories, and the industry coming together, because research is not an esoteric activity. It cannot be something that is done and which is not benefiting the community at all. So research must result in good paper publications, must result in patents that are created, and must improve the quality of life and the quality of, let us say, disciplinary depth itself going forward. So that reach of research is something that was lacking and which we are trying to address through the policy through a number of ways. And coming up now, you're also seeing this whole dimension that if India has 44 million students, these 44 million students should be able to get jobs. And they should, if they are not going to get jobs, then at least we should encourage entrepreneurial skills in students. And so a focus from becoming job seekers to becoming job creators is looking at the whole dimensions of startups and so on, and hackathons being encouraged so that children can become start up their own enterprises and set up their own enterprises. And right from ideation to productization and marketization, a value chain that is created through a kind of linkage with industry, and also giving an impetus with some seed money and funding that needs to come in from various government departments. We are now trying to address that gap in higher education. Now, going forward, we also see the other challenge, and I'll come to the core area that we're talking about, and that is the poor quality of higher education. So here it is you and I who are actually being hung by by being crucified, I would say, because for someone who was in academics and worked in the government, the first thing that the administration would like to say about the poor quality of teaching of education is to blame the teacher, saying that the teacher is not having the kind of skills and is not competent and is not providing, is not bringing out good graduates and good students who are productive individuals and so on. To some extent we can, but it can never be generalized. The poor quality of teaching comes in because the kind of training that is needed, the kind of continuous capacity building and professional development that is needed. Say, for example, today we are moving into hybrid models of teaching, and you have never been used to using technology in a manner that helps in the teaching process, which means I need to be trained. So you can't hold the teacher responsible, and I'm not trying to absolve, because I was always accused of taking the side of the teaching fraternity as coming from that fraternity and working in the government. But I've always said that you cannot say that 100% of the teachers are poor teachers. You may have aberrations, and that's there across. You don't have all of them being good administrators. You don't have all of them being good, let us say, industrialists. Every sector has that. So you cannot condemn the higher education poor quality as being only attributable to the poor quality of teachers. And for teachers to become effective, we need to have outcome-based education. We need to have new pedagogies, to have more innovative ways in which we learn, make our students learn. When we say learner-centered, look at it from the learner's dimension, and therefore look at, as I said, the importance of outcome-based education and instilling in our students the knowledge and understanding and the skills and the competencies, so that they are not memorizing something, rote learning something, and regurgitating that on an answer script, and then coming out into the world of jobs where people say these graduates are unemployable. Not that they don't have employment, but they are not worthy of getting any jobs because they don't have the basic employability skills. Now that, in a certain sense, is an extremely, I would say, crisis situation, because India, as having the largest youth population in the world, is seen as to be providing the soft power and the human capital to the entire world, which is largely seeing an aging population, be it Japan or Korea or China or the European countries. All of them are seeing an aging population. And it is India which is having the largest youth population. So the need that these students have very high employability quotient in them actually falls upon us, because though we may not attribute higher education as directly relatable to only employment, it is one of the factors that students come in for higher education. I would still say that to a large extent, coming out from a middle class aspiring higher education, large number of students actually join higher education, not for getting a world view and a better understanding, but in terms of being more capable of getting jobs. And that we should never forget as teachers. And therefore the need to provide training, continuous retraining, capacity building and leadership development becomes very critical, because leadership development directly impacts governance. Now, which brings me to the other challenge that we are talking about, which is what this topic is really all about, that our higher education institutions are not well governed institutions. When we say they are not well governed institutions, we mean to say that their financial administration, their general administration, their academic administration, their aspects relating to HR management, student management, all of them are found wanting in a number of ways. And that comes about because if the leadership that is there, whether it is at the level of entry level person or a mid level person or a senior level person, the importance of trying to know many things that go to make a good academic leader becomes very important. It also depends on a lot of, let us say, internal checks and balances, good governance practices, transparency and accountability, balancing autonomy and accountability. All these factors would determine the kind of governance structures that we have. Now, what makes it very complex to have good governance in Indian higher education comes from the character of a higher education institution itself. When I say there are 1,000 to 1,200 universities, some of them are governed by the government of India. They are centrally funded institutions. A bulk of them come from the state government. They are governed by the states. Then you have the private universities. You have the deemed universities. You have within this the whole concept of unitary universities and affiliating universities, and the whole system of affiliation puts forward a huge challenge in terms of managing affiliated colleges and ensuring that all affiliated colleges under a host university provides the kind of quality. So the character of the higher education institution being so varied in terms of their geographical jurisdiction, in terms of their funding pattern, in terms of the ownership of that institution, makes it very tough. While centrally funded institutions get large funding, state government institutions or government run institutions of the states are very poorly funded. And ironically, the bulk of the enrollment, 94% of the higher education enrollment, is not in those centrally funded central universities, IITs and NITs and ICERs and so on. The bulk of them are in the state universities. And these state universities are starved of funds, and therefore development grants not being there, infrastructure is not available, there is very poor laboratories there, any teaching learning resources are not there, including ICT facilities are limited, and many other issues relating to transportation and so on. And that whole aspect directly impinges upon their governance. The absence of all this, because for good governance, there is a minimum requirement in terms of infrastructure and teaching positions being filled in and technical staff being available and so on. So when the absence of funds directly impacts that, and I say that 94% of student enrollment are in the state universities, this bulk of the universities that are actually facing the problems of governance. Similarly, when the sector allows for the private investment and we have private institutions there, the policy as such says that we are accepting that the private sector plays a major role in education, whether it is in schools or whether it's in colleges or whether it is in universities or whether it's in professional education. We know that the private sector is there. So to say that the private sector recognize their role, we have also said that education remains a not-for-profit activity, and therefore the importance of making it not commercialized, but any revenue generation that happens in private institutions cannot be diverted for any other activity but for the development of educational infrastructure and the educational development of that institution. Now, that is again a challenge because some private institutions are run like family trusts. They are owned, and the investor who has put that it demands the positions of leadership and so on, while they are not competent academically and they are not qualified academically to hold those positions, which can be of the vice chancellor or even the pro vice chancellor. Many of the private universities face this huge deficit in terms of actually giving their leadership position to family. And so as such, we do not want to encourage that. But to have good governance, you need to have good internal governing bodies, which is what I will be talking about. And at the same time, when you talk about autonomy and accountability, since funding comes to us from University Grants Commission or the AICT and so on, the external regulation also becomes a very major factor. So Shakir was talking about a light but tight. It is a light but tight regulation that we have been talking about in this policy. And therefore, I touch upon that as being a very important part of good governance and management. But let me complete the challenges that we are facing. And one more challenge that we are looking at in higher education. India is in this policy promoting a cause for internationalization of higher education. It's not just promoting it, it is a reality that mobility today is a reality, that students go to other countries for higher education. We have student exchange programs, we have faculty exchange programs, and the policy has talked about joint degrees, dual degrees, and twinning arrangements. And the policy is encouraging international collaboration, including the setting up of foreign universities here. But on one side, the leadership does not seem to understand that on yearly the outgo of our Indian students there outside this country is a humongous number, 7.5 lakhs of students going out every year. And in coming into India is just a handful of about 40,000 students. So when we say we want to become like, go back to our times of Nalanda and Takshashila and become a Vishwa Guru kind of a thing, the idea is that you must be able to have mobility both ways. And therefore, the need of looking at cross-border higher education in a more, I would say, focused manner, and also looking at how to attract foreign students to come into our campuses is also a very important challenge that we have. And unless otherwise, because we would have dwindling numbers in our higher education institutions, and we are seeing a steady increase in the number of students who are going out, not just for post-graduation and their doctoral programs, but at undergraduate education, which is resulting in a number of institutions getting closed down across the length and breadth of this country. Now, this is the scenarios of challenges, broadly, some of the major challenges that we are talking about. And one way we are trying to look at addressing the problem is to ensure that our higher education institutions are well-governed institutions. I don't think any of us over here will have any doubt in our mind that when you talk about a well-governed institution, there are processes and procedures that are there in place. There is a fair and transparent system, and that every individual in that system is held accountable for that. So for the internal governance, on one side, we are saying from the faculty's point of view that we should encourage faculty to go in for leadership development. So Shakir talked about our program of LEAP, and AMU is also a center for academic leadership and educational management. So nurturing young faculty to go on to become future leaders is an ongoing, continuous capacity building program. And when you talk about that, what kind of skills are you trying to instill in young faculty through leadership development programs? You want them to have certain qualities of a good academic leader, which means that you will teach them how to become good at visioning and strategizing a plan of action. How do you build good student support services? How do you have good people management skills, conflict resolution, understanding administrative rules and regulations, understanding financial processes and procedures, looking at good teaching and learning, including research and skills, looking at international collaboration, looking at funding, which is a major area of internal revenue generation. So this aspect of good leaders having certain necessary skills in these areas that is ranging from visioning and strategizing, people management skills, conflict resolution, effective student support services, looking at inclusive education and student diversity there, good teaching, learning and research, including skills within that, using technology in a very effective manner, encouraging international collaborations, and then looking at administrative management, rules and regulations, and financial processes. All this, along with finally the whole idea of internationalization, is something that we need to nurture in young faculty through leadership development programs. And we should never think that, okay, I am only an assistant professor, why should I be looking at it? Because each one of us has a role going forward to look at leadership roles. And also, we are very clear in this policy that whether it is a college or a university, we don't want it to be headed by someone who is a person not coming from academics. Ideally, the educational institutions must be headed by teachers and faculty who grow on to evolve to that leadership positions. And moment they are transformed to become a leader in the position of a dean or a director or a provost or a pro-vice chancellor or any of these positions, you cannot say I am only a teacher of chemistry or I am only a teacher of this and I do not know what administrative rules and regulations are. The ignorance of rules and regulations is non-negotiable, because moment you become in those positions, you need to learn that. And therefore, every faculty must be given the kind of training so that going forward they understand the intricacies. Now, I'm not saying that even if we go on to become those positions, that we may know all the minute rules and regulations, but we should be conscious about the broad frameworks, the broad procedures, the broad processes that needs to be followed, so that even if you have a registrar and a finance officer and all the administrative staff to guide you and keep you abreast about it, you should not be taken for a joyride because of your ignorance about it altogether. While you may not know, because it all comes in note sheets and things like that, but you must also therefore be self-aware and also be self-empowered and knowledgeable about these aspects. As I said, therefore, an understanding of that through the training and through the need to know all these things must be a continuous effort. And even at this stage, you are at the initial stage, we are talking of young faculty being groomed for as an early entrant into the leadership, then at the mid-level when you become an associate professor, and then when you become a professor, because that is when you're going to go into the senior management and the leadership. Other than this aspect, the importance that higher education institutions should have robust internal governing bodies. So all of us know that universities would have a board of management or an executive committee, that the nomenclature may vary from whether it's a central university or a state university, but these are the high level bodies that are taking the decision making in that what kind of academic programs, what kind of research, what is the policy that we will follow, the technology policy we will follow, or the student policy that we may have, or for the teachers, what kind of policies we will encourage. These are all taken by senior management bodies like the board of management or the executive committee and so on. Coming down, you might even, some of them call it even the Senate and so on. Then you have academic councils, you have the finance committee, you have research committees that are there, administrative committees that are created for specific functions. In all this, the representatives of faculty is a must. And in the policy, we talked about another body which can either be replacing that executive committee or the board of management, and that we called is an empowered board of governors. So the BOG, which we are saying is an empowered body, has minimum external representatives. If it is a public funded institution, it will have representatives from the government. But otherwise, it should be an internally selected body which will have teacher representatives, student representatives, civil society representatives, the industry representatives, parent representatives, people from the community as there, and the number of government representatives kept to the minimum. And this body is not nominated by anyone externally, but is internally elected by the institution itself. So, a very democratic process of creating a participatory body, because this internal body, which is the empowered board of governors, would be then taking the decisions about seeing where that institution should be going forward. I told you about visioning and strategizing. So in the policy, we have talked about an instrumentality called an institutional development plan. An institutional development plan is a strategic plan of action where an institution would work out for itself what is its vision and mission, what are its goals and objectives, and where it would be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, 10 years from now. So we wrote about teaching intensive universities, research intensive universities, multidisciplinary education and research universities, that affiliated colleges can go on to become degree granting autonomous colleges and so on. So in the institutional development plan, we would like the empowered board of governors, which is a representative body, working in a collegiate manner with all cross sections of that institution, along with educationists, scientists, and local community leaders, to envision where you would like to see your college or university going forward. So go back and visit the websites of your colleges. You would have a vision statement as a vision statement frozen in point of time. These are never to be frozen in point of time. You need to review that and look at it from the new requirements. Say, for example, this policy itself. So revisiting the vision and the mission, looking at the new emphasis in terms of the goals and the objectives. Objectives can be in terms of increasing access, giving equity, and therefore including all sections, how to enhance quality, are faculty positions vacant. So there is a SWOT analysis that will be done. In the exercise of preparing an IDP, there will be an internal exercise of doing as analysis of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges or threats, whereby you will take a stock. What is the infrastructure deficit? What is the faculty deficit? What is the teaching learning resources deficit? And it is not somebody else's business. You are also to be equally a part of it. So even as a young faculty, you must know, for example, in your department, as a teacher teaching a given subject, what are the shortages in terms of the content that is there, in terms of the teaching learning resources, in terms of technical help that you get, in terms of infrastructure deficit, in terms of physical amenities that are there, staff rooms, whether they are there, whether there are functional toilets, all these things. Because it is not to be seen in isolation, understanding an institution in its totality. So going forward, each one of us needs to have small plans so that it gets integrated into the whole institution's institutional development plan. Then you set some key targets, you set some timelines, you put some budgetary allocation for that, and see it going forward. And the IDP is not a document that is made one time and thrown into the archives of some shelf and never looked at again. It's a living document that is a point of reference in terms of looking at, let us say you're going for accreditation or you're going for ranking. You're looking at data that you're supplying to the All India Survey for Higher Education. How do you look at all these matrices going forward and meeting all the requirements of quality assurance? So an affiliated college wanting to become autonomous does not look at becoming autonomous tomorrow. It looks at a 10-year window, and therefore in that IDP, in the strategic planning, you think of what you need to do in a graded manner to become a fully autonomous college. So each institution, and that institution is not separate from you. You must feel a sense of belonging to the institution with which you're working. And that comes in when you participate in the corporate life of that institution. And that is why that leadership development must come in. And your role in an internal governance system by participating in the IDP, and if your institutions have not started on it, you should be carrying forward this message that it is a very important instrument which is determining good governance of that institution. And since today we are talking about technology, we are looking at no method of Inspector Raj and of licensing as such, but of having fair and transparent systems. So, for accreditation, we are now going for binary accreditation. We are looking at one nation, one data in a certain sense, that the people who are handling data are not repeatedly asked to submit data, one for all India survey, one for ranking, one for accreditation, rather that it is all in a very effective ERP system and a management information system doing it, and all of it is there in public domain, and therefore disclosure becomes very important for all the stakeholders, students who are there already, teachers who are teaching there, parents whose children are studying there, the senior management, and anyone in the public, because it is the taxpayers' money that we are investing in the higher education institution. Therefore, the need for disclosure becomes important, and technology is a great enabler which helps us to facilitate that kind of fair and transparent system with minimal human intervention. That is the way going forward. So the whole accreditation process, which is up for an overall, will stop this kind of peer visits and coming over there and all those things, because all of it is going to get into the technology platform, and you are looking at it from and it is open for anyone to see, for any person wanting to know about that college or that institution. So your role in participating in the IDP making becomes important. So much for the internal governance. Now coming to and as I said, capacity building programs for leadership development for young faculty, mid-level faculty, and for senior faculty is also now being conducted by the UGC and by the ministry. And you must be able to take the benefit of these, because this is something that you are going to be doing in the coming years as you go forward. And even today, you're contributing to the strength of your institution in terms of better governance by being a part of such activities. Now, regulation. When we talk about regulation, Indian higher education system is an over-regulated higher education system. We have 17 regulatory councils. The most familiar to you and me is the UGC, the AICTE, the National Council for Teacher Education, the National Medical Commission, the Bar Council of India, the Council of Architecture, the Pharmacy Council, the Indian Nursing Council, the Agriculture Council of India. So there are 17 such professional councils. And we have put forward this whole notion of multidisciplinary education, where we want institutions to collaborate across various disciplines, which means belonging to any of these disciplines, managed by different professional councils. They will all be collaborating to provide multidisciplinary education. Now, in terms of regulation itself, the higher education space system that we have, when UGC was created by an act of the parliament in 1956, we had just about 50 universities. And the UGC was seen as a body which will ensure that higher education institutions follow rules and regulations for admissions, for conduct of examinations, that these are the academic programs they have, these are the norms that they follow for recruitment of teachers, for administrators. So it was regulating, that was the whole idea, so that certain fair set of norms and procedures and standards were followed. But it was taking care of funding, because it is also looking at that aspect, and the funding was given. So the ministry gives the UGC funds, and the UGC funds the institutions, giving them development grants. It also started taking care of accreditation when NAC has been created, which takes care of accreditation of the higher education institutions. So, and also finally, it takes care of standard setting. It says that you cannot offer programs with a nomenclature of this kind. This should be the broad curricula and so on. So in short, the 4 different functions of, let us say, regulating, funding, academic standard setting, and accreditation, which are actually not necessarily, let us say, in the same direction. They can be mutually conflicting. That is held in one institution, and that is the UGC. So there is an over concentration of 4 different functions in the same body, which are sometimes mutually conflicting function. And it is like saying, if the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary are in the same body, it is fundamentally a wrong thing to do. So the policy, we wrote that light but tight regulation. The meaning is that we need to have separation of functions of regulating, accrediting, funding, and standard setting. And that is what we recommended, that the function, these 4 functions cannot reside in the same body, because there can be conflicts of interest and there is an over concentration of power. And given the size and scale of the higher education system today from what it was in the 1950s, we must have these separation of powers. So we said that all the 17 regulatory councils will concede their regulatory powers, and we talked about a new set of institutions, the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, which will take care of regulating higher education institutions. What for preconditions? What are the preconditions to set up a college or a university? What are the minimum requirements in terms of land, infrastructure, and ensuring that these are being followed and that there are no fake degrees and fake institutions and so on, regulating part of it. Then comes the funding part of it. So we have said that the exercise is a legislative exercise. A bill has to be introduced in the parliament, and moment that becomes an act, that is the Higher Education Commission of India Act, then the existing bodies like the UGC, AICT, and NCT and all become null and void. And since UGC is the largest funding body for all the higher education institutions, and that would become only a sort of a body which is no longer existing, we provided for a body which we call is the Higher Education Grants Council, which will take care of funding of higher education. The bodies that are looking at an accreditation, which is the existing NAAC and NBA, these will become a part and parcel of a super accrediting body, which we call is the National Accreditation Council, which will be like a meta accreditor. And these would be not only the 2 accrediting bodies, but several other accrediting agencies that can become a part of the accreditation council. And all these 17 regulatory councils, they will become standard setting bodies like the NCT for teacher education, AICT for technical education, Bar Council for legal education, and so on. So these would become the academic standard setting bodies, which we call as the professional standard setting bodies. And since UGC, which is looking after general education, will be null and void, we called for the idea of a general education council. So the 4 verticals that we are looking at is the NHERC for regulating, the National Accreditation Council for accreditation, the Higher Education Grants Council for funding, and the professional standard setting bodies, including the General Education Council for academic standard, 4 separate independent bodies. And in order to ensure that if at all these 4 bodies have any conflicts, to resolve that, we are talking about an umbrella architecture called the Higher Education Commission of India. So the HECI is a body which is a new regulatory architecture, which can come in only through an act of the parliament, because UGC is created by an act of the parliament. And only 2 regulatory bodies, that is the Bar Council of India and the National Medical Commission, said that for the time being, they may be exempted from the HECI ambit for their regulatory part, not for the multidisciplinarity. But now that we have had so much of delay in the HECI bill itself being tabled, though it was announced by the Honorable Finance Minister in two of her budget statements, and it's possible that it may now come in, because there is a need for a lot of consensus building when bringing out the HECI Act, because it has to be in consultation with the state governments who have a lot of apprehensions about this new architecture, and understandably so. But that consensus building has not yet happened. So the regulatory architecture that the NEP has proposed and recommended in the policy has not yet become a reality. But moment it becomes a reality, as I said, the existing acts of the UGC, AICT, NCT becomes null and void, and they become transformed to become professional standard setting bodies. And this separation of powers, which will ensure that a better regulation, which is not over regulating the higher education system, but is minimally regulating it through separate bodies, and there is no concentration of all the functions in one single body, will ensure a more effective regulation of India's higher education system. Now that, as I said, is still in the works. It has not yet come about. And when it comes about, you will see another set. So as of now, what has happened is the policies, regulations for implementing NEP recommendations are all brought out by the UGC. And when I say UGC, all the guidelines relating to the 4-year program, multiple entry exit, academic bank of credit, all that is brought out by the UGC collectively through the work, through the membership and the representation of AICT, NCT, and many of these regulatory bodies who are part of these committees, so that the whole notions of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinary education can be carried out in a seamless manner. So what we are looking at in the higher education space within our countries, that India's higher education system is undoubtedly the largest in terms of numbers. There is a need to make it very effective in terms of very robust governance, which will yield to better management of higher education institutions, and also yield to better teaching, learning, and collaboration and research and so on. So for that, good governance is essential, that we leverage technology in a very effective manner, so that the Inspector Raj goes off and more of fair and transparent systems come in through public disclosures. And once the regulatory system also is streamlined, we would have a very robust higher education system. This is what is envisaged. As teachers and as educators, though we may not today be having a direct role in it, it is very important for us to understand the nuances of this, particularly because we are talking about an instrumentality. One, that is the institutional development plan, and the other is the empowered board of governors, which will have teacher representatives, and all of us must feel a sense of belonging to the higher education institution with which we are teaching, so that we can contribute to its growth and development, and align our growth and development to that of the institution's growth and development. I think I'll stop over here and leave the remaining 10 minutes for interaction. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm looking forward to questions and any thoughts or any issues that you face. But this time it should be confined to the topic that we are covered today.
Good evening, ma'am.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Shomalla Ghosh. I am working as a assistant professor in a government college in West Bengal. Ma'am, few aspects which you have touched upon is very important for us, because of the first of all means you have talked about that it is very essential to uh, essential for all the institution of higher education to look upon themselves as a part of the broader goal, number one. And then you have talked about that every institution must have its own institutional development plan, which is very important because now in these days, because now it is, we are in a means in a position where either you need to face the challenge or you need to quit from the race if you don't means cope up with these new challenges, new possibilities. And ma'am, you have talked about that this kind of regulatory governance which we have means, but ma'am, my issue is like, if you see the transformation, the creation of the regulate independent regulators means under the new political economy, because we are enter into the new liberalized age, ma'am. Is this not that if this kind of regulatory body will be created in the education sector, then they automatically push up the interested of the investors rather than the educators or the students? Because actually we know that in most of the cases, like from the telecommunication to IRDA, whatever we see, that if there is a regulatory body, they actually working in favor of the regulated industry. So now in this context, if we bring that issue of loss and profit in case of the education sector, then ultimately will it not hamper the means the quality of education? Like it will force every institution from every center from the municipal corporation to municipality, from the center periphery, all the educational institutions to forcefully to enter into the race. And once you will feel that means I am not in a position to cope up, ultimately your moral will be damaged. So ma'am, from this perspective, whether means and which kind of approach should be taken by this kind of means regulatory authority, if it is being implemented or if it is being created by supplementing like AICT, UGC. And ma'am, one thing we know that during this time when UGC, you have told that UGC is given the is the largest body which is still now giving the grant to the education institution, ma'am. But ma'am, do you ma'am, you do you think that till now the UGC is giving the grant in that way? Because now in these days means the grant has been very much limited, because earlier time we have seen that during the time that UGC, but now very few times we have heard about the UGC is given any grant. Ma'am, what is the issue then?
So first and foremost, UGC is the grant giving body and it has to be giving development grants. Earlier used to link that with the plan period. Now they
Yes,
don't have plan period. So it is related to an annual allocation of funds depending on the ministry's allocation that it gives to the University Grants Commission. So development grants, maybe the quantum of it may have come down because of financial allocations going in a limited manner. And that is because for someone who's been in the government, I can tell you that a scheme like National Mission on Teachers and Teaching, which had an allocation of about nearly 500 crores, in about 5 years of our existence, we spend less than 190 crores. The ability of institutions to spend money, except for construction of buildings, rather than for actual appointment of teachers and creating the kind of laboratory facilities and so on, but only investing in capital expenditure, is really a kind of a dichotomy that we are seeing. But the limited grants that are coming, as I mentioned at the beginning itself, as one of the challenges of higher education, is the poor funding of state funded institutions.
Yes,
While
ma'am.
IIT or so may get 1800 crores annually, a state university may be getting a minuscule 10 crores, which is no way a manner of comparison at all. It is just beyond comparison to talk of that kind of a reward. But you're concerned that because we are talking about the separation of powers and that UGC should not be the single body that looks after funding, which looks after regulation, which looks after accreditation, which looks after standard setting, and that the separation of powers would result in private players getting a greater thrust is a misplaced apprehension, for the simple reason that the idea that private players are there is recognized by us. They have always been there, but we have always said that the purpose of education would be a public service, and it is not for profit activity. So just because an NHERC comes into existence, that thrust does not change. On the contrary, the current ability of the UGC to be able to monitor such a large higher education system, 50,000 affiliated colleges and 1,200
Yes, ma'am.
universities, is absolutely an unmanageable one. And the reason why we are even changing the accreditation norms to going from the current grading system to binary accreditation,
Yes, ma'am.
less than 20% of the colleges and universities go for accreditation. So the need to bring about these reforms is long overdue. And your apprehension that don't compare this to IRDA and all those, because that is a different ball game altogether, and that is for regulating a system. Say, when you say regulating early childhood care and education, we have a number of play schools that operate, and these play schools are doing more damage than good in the business, and it is more seen as a commercial enterprise. It is not seen for instilling really the joy of learning and early childhood care and education. So somebody is free, someone has space, then they think it as a commercial venture. So the need to regulate that, or regulating coaching classes, the whole racket that has been happening. So we brought about that, we brought it in terms of regulation. But these regulations should have teeth, in the sense that they should be able to punish the offender. So the regulatory reforms we are talking about seeks to provide that kind of wherewithal, where these
Yes,
bodies will actually
okay.
have the power to take action against defaulting and institutions which are not meeting with the norms. Not your fear that that would be a mechanism to push out public funded institution to allow private players. In fact, private players will become more cautious. The regulatory conditions that we are saying is that if at all we come to know that private players are not providing scholarships, they are following discriminatory policies, they are making education a commercialized activity, that we will take strict punitive action. Right now, the UGC does not have the teeth to do that punitive action at all. Whereas, because the size is so large, it goes unnoticed unless there are some things brought to their notice. So the idea, therefore, of separating powers is not with an intention of looking at a discrimination between public and private, or trying to leverage a system which encourages certain players, but on the contrary, try to provide a level playing field where all institutions have opportunities for growth and effective autonomy along with accountability. So I think
Okay,
more you
ma'am.
think about it, you should be able to understand it better. And the attempt to bring about these reforms are long overdue, because only then our higher education system, which is so large, can also become very qualitatively good in terms of improved rankings, better research, better productive students with higher employability quotient, and all this, as I said, it transforms the quality of higher education altogether. So your apprehensions are unfounded, and I think that a proper understanding, you will realize that this is a better way to go about, because none of us would agree as a Indian citizen itself that in a democratic country, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary cannot be combined together. They have to be separated, and the functions of regulation, funding,
Yes, ma'am.
standard setting, and accreditation cannot be in one body, but has to be in independent bodies, which is what the regulatory reform is talking about.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, and one thing
So
I
let me
remember.
just see if there is anybody else who wants to
Okay.
ask a question. Anyone else, please? Any other participant? If not, Somalia, you can go ahead. Yeah, please ask your question. And I think it's
Ma'am,
almost 5:30 for the next
yes,
speaker to come.
Ma'am, you have talked about I'm a member of my college of this NAP committee. So means, ma'am, then according to your view, means we know that uh, there are some modifications, or we can say that there is a qualitative change in the parameters of the NAC. So, ma'am, means these changes in the parameters, like introduction of the binary, is this has been done keeping in the new education policy
Yes,
format?
yes,
So
yes.
in order to give this institution more flexibility, ma'am?
Not only flexibility, the need that we should encourage all institutions to get accredited.
To take it over.
Many of
Okay.
the institutions do not come in thinking that they will not get A++, and
Yes,
therefore
ma'am.
they don't go in for accreditation at all. And many of the colleges also come out of it. So to encourage that all institutions
Okay.
make minimum benchmarks of quality assurance, we said that we make it binary, either you're accredited or not accredited. And also globally, the few Asian countries only do this kind of grading in accreditation. World over,
Yes, ma'am.
accreditation is always only binary accreditation. And therefore, that is a reform that was long overdue. And we are now embracing that. I believe it is getting launched from September 2024.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Any other participant? Is there anyone from AMU present? Because I think if there are no more questions, we can wind up the session. Any other participant, please? Okay, I think there are no more questions over here. It's already about 5:31. I can't see anyone from AMU, HRDC being present over here. So please read through the UGC regulations. There are a couple of, several of them, even for your 4-year undergraduate program. Read through these guidelines. It is not just enough to read through the policy, so that you yourself feel very empowered as a faculty to understand how these norms are getting implemented. Thank you very much. Take care and stay blessed.